Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to get started. I am Lisa Mensa, and you have come to the
consent rules and the risk that they will be sued for a second benefit by an unhappy spouse by simply not offering annuities. There's another big reason why employers choose not to offer annuities in their 401k plans, and that's the extra fiduciary liability that attaches to annuities. This came about back in the early 1990s when, in response to a problem in the defined benefit plan system, Congress passed the Pension Annuitants Protection Act. This act imposes additional fiduciary liability on employers whose plan participants choose annuities, whether it's in a defined benefit or a defined contribution plan. It gives those participants additional rights to sue their employers and ask to be made whole if, for example, there is a problem with the insurance company providing the annuity down the road. This means that employers can potentially be held liable if they fail to properly evaluate the providers of the annuities they offer in their plans. There is some regulatory guidance about what procedures employers could follow to avoid liability when selecting a provider, but many employers, especially small ones, find it too difficult to follow. So many employers believe, usually on the advice of their lawyers like me, that it is better to avoid the potential for future litigation by offering only lump sums or phased withdrawal options in their 401k plans. Of course, workers still have the ability to take their lump sums and buy an annuity on their own, but they do so without the benefit of employer-provided education and product vetting. But to be fair to employers, it's not just their self-interest that explains why 401k plans lack annuities. The evidence shows that as currently offered, annuities are just not appealing to plan participants. Even in the very few 401k plans that offer them, few participants choose one. And even in defined benefit plans where participants must affirmatively opt out of an annuity, many participants and their spouses choose to do so. But as my other panelists will describe, there are some very promising developments today that could help us patch this hole in the private pension system. There is new learning about how to talk with participants about managing their savings in retirement. There is new learning about how participants think about lifelong income products like annuities and about what they like and dislike in these products. And there are new lifetime income products available that could do a better job of meeting participant expectations and desires. Of course, there remain some complicated legal issues such as spousal rights and fiduciary liability to resolve before these products become a routine feature in 401k plans. And there's, as yet, no consensus on the way forward. The conversation is just beginning, and its outcome will shape the direction of 401k plans in the future. Over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Pamela. I think I'll stay here to save time. So the Treasury and Labor Departments have embarked on a process that Lisa mentioned to generate a real national conversation on this topic of how better to facilitate the management of retirement savings in the drawdown phase. We've focused for years, as we know, on the importance of building up retirement security, whether through defined benefit or account balance-based savings, and we are continuing to focus on that. But the discussion is broadening to embrace the issues of how best to manage the assets that have been accumulated, how best to put together different potential pieces that would add up to a sensible program for retirement security. And the Treasury and Labor Departments have benefited very much from comments by many people in this room, the Aspen Institute, and many others here, I think all of my co-panelists' organizations, that have really added meaningfully to the thinking and analysis and information on this broad and fundamental issue. Obviously, the pieces are all interconnected. It doesn't make much sense to talk about how best to manage one's savings or assets in retirement if there aren't any savings or assets in retirement. It isn't sensible to focus just on accumulating if you're going to dissipate those assets in immediate consumption in circumstances where that might not be the wisest thing to do for that particular household. So the issues of savings, accumulation, promoting plan formation, supporting the employer plan system, minimizing leakage of savings during the accumulation and active employment phase and during the retirement phase, helping people with the complex management of the risks they confront, the financial risks, especially in retirement, is the broad gauge version of this. And so Treasury and Labor are looking at those issues. We're thinking about what we can do to be constructive and helpful in this area. What we're not trying to do is to limit ourselves to a particular type of product or a particular sector. We're looking broadly. We're looking at the 401ks that you were talking about, Pamela, and how perhaps to make options for lifetime income or in various income approaches more available, more user-friendly in the 401k context, or how to make it easier for people in the private sector to do that. And we're not excluding IRAs, where now something like 44% of the retirement assets reside. We're not excluding defined benefit plans, just as the effort to help 401ks consider more income solutions as alternatives for plan participants can be viewed as part of a broader effort to DBify the 401k a little bit, to make it a little more like a pension, per your earlier comment, Pamela, that pensions have been declining in a sense and retirement savings have been in the ascendant. Similarly, not only do we perhaps benefit from helping 401ks to be where they want to be, more like defined benefit plans, but also helping defined benefit plans to be more like defined benefit plans, in the sense that over time there's been less lifetime income. The DB is a traditional source of low-cost, convenient, lifetime guaranteed predictable income, including spousal protection through a joint and survivor annuity. And the trend toward hybrid plans that are framing the benefit as an account balance rather than a pension paycheck, if you will, or a retirement income stream. The trend of these plans in the DB universe, the cash balance pension equity plans, as in the whole universe, the trend toward DCs, has framed the benefit for many people as a presumptive lump sum. If it's an account balance, then one thinks of it as a lump sum, and the wealth illusion that tends to accompany that, that so many of us have. Gosh, I've got $70,000 accumulated in my 401k. I'm set for retirement. And that's a huge amount of money. Surely that must be enough. Without translating that into a 30 or 35-year income stream, without fully taking cognizance of the fact that the chances of outliving my life expectancy are fully 50-50, without taking into account the fact that one's decumulation management, that is the management of assets, the amount you can withdraw and still have enough to last the rest of your life, is not symmetrical with the accumulation. That is the risk diversification, the strategies for riding out the bad years by hanging in there for the good years and having diversified asset classes when one is saving and when one is accumulating, that does not apply the same way when one is in the retirement phase and taking money out. That the volatility, the potential impact of a few bad years, such as those we've seen recently, can be an unraveling effect in the spend down phase in a different way than it is in the accumulation phase. Those perceptions are ones that many people don't have. The sense of how to convert the account balance to the income stream is something that's difficult for many of us. And so we are, Treasury and Labor, looking at these issues and the comments that have suggested that an all or nothing approach is also part of the problem. That again, when it comes to framing the choices for individuals, has been a great tendency to ask people, do you want an annuity or do you want a lump sum? And so many choose the lump sum automatically and reflexively without thinking about whether, in fact, what's optimal for them in their situation is some combination of approaches, not just lump sum, not just annuity. There are various alternatives for investing, for managing, and different ones may be suitable, of course, for people in different circumstances. We're listening here. We're not in a talking mode as much as in a listening mode, so thank you for arranging this, Lisa and your colleagues, and we're very much looking forward to this discussion and to getting further good ideas from all of you here. Cindy?
Thanks, Mark. Thank you to Lisa and to Aspen for inviting us here. I didn't know we were just listening, Mark, but I'm planning on talking.
For the government, though.
Oh, okay. There you go. I worried. I'm here, actually, Pam asked me to talk about very generally all consumers, not just women. So that's really hard for me, and I won't be able to do that, but I'm going to try. And Weiser's goal is to help consumers make the best decisions they can with their limited income. We're very fortunate that we had someone on our board back in the early years, 2000, who's an actuary. And so that terrified me the minute I began to understand what it all meant myself. So we've been working on this issue for a long time, not seeing a lot of progress, but we've been at least working on it and running and telling people how scary it all is. So I'd like to talk about three basic points here. And first of all, I'd like to say that we all sit in this room and we all sort of know the acronyms and all this. No one knows anything. Out there in the world, no one knows anything. And you can read the paper every day and see who's been swindled and who'd been this and that and why people have no retirement money. Believe me, if they knew, a lot of people would have maybe done things if it were easier. But most people don't understand any of this, and it doesn't matter even what their education is or how much money they have. So, first of all, I'd like to say that most consumers actually need help with effective strategies. There's no one-size-fits-all, and each person's situation is unique. A lifetime income option is not optimal for all retirees, nor is annuitizing 100% of a retiree's income. However, I believe that all participants deserve the benefit of a more complete understanding of this option. Second, consumers need the best education available to become informed. They're unlikely to use annuities unless they're aware of the full range of benefits that are available. They need objective help in order to make these complicated choices, but most Americans do not have sufficient financial capability. Millions of workers have to make complex decisions that they aren't prepared to make. And we all know that it's really complicated. All through the accumulation stage, there's a lack of understanding of what these account balances will provide in retirement. Senators Bingaman, Cole, and Isaacson have introduced legislation that will provide for income disclosure on 401k statements. We'll talk to a few people about that. Talk to 4 people, you'll get 4 different opinions. People will think this is the end of the world, which David will probably mention something about that soon. There's wide disagreement, even among people I know that believe in financial education. Oh, no, we can't tell people that. Oh, no. Okay. So at Weiser, we think that, people need more information about retirement readiness generally. And a few years ago, we actually had Senator Gordon Smith introduce a bill that would have included a readiness checklist with 5 to 8 questions that everyone needs to know on the Social Security statement. Wouldn't that help, like one of those little cards or something, telling you whether or not you're prepared to be retired? So perhaps we could have changes like what the Card Act did, putting the little boxes on the statement, not putting it on the 401k statement maybe, because that would upset David even more. Maybe the Social Security statement as we're thinking about redoing all of that. Weiser just finished releasing a report with the Society of Actuaries. It's available on our website. The Impact of Retirement Risk on Women, based on the Actuaries' 2009 Risks and Process of Retirement Survey Report. But there's a new item in the survey that really stands out, especially as the boomers are beginning to retire. That finding is the inadequate pre-retirement planning horizon. There's hardly any difference between the sexes when it comes to how far into the future most people look when planning their future finances. It's sort of amazing. They're looking 1 year, so it's obvious why people aren't thinking about annuities if they're going to make you think for the rest of your life. So women are more affected by this not planning, obviously, but only 8% of women and 6% of men have planned for living 20 years. It's astonishing to me. Anyway, the report got a lot of press about that issue. So the lack of planning is pivotal, coupled with the fact that the products are always changing, the regulations are always changing, and the legislation is always being introduced. But I'm ever hopeful that we're moving toward better technology which will help lead the way. Perhaps 5 years from now, the job of educating consumers about these retirement issues will become easier. The Lifetime Income Conference that Weiser co-sponsored last year with AARP and ASPA brought together the financial services industry, including insurance companies and investment companies. I've mentioned this a few times publicly, and I have no affiliation with Putnam, and I apologize if there's someone else from the financial industry that has a better financial tool that I haven't seen. But what they've done is introduce a lifetime income analysis tool. And what it does is it gives the 401k participant the opportunity to analyze all of their income, and includes a way to add in Social Security and any other savings. I know that there are a lot of great calculators out there, but this means when you look up your 401k balance, it is all there. So you don't have to know about all these other calculators, which none of the people who don't know anything will know that those calculators even exist. We also need to quickly find other ways to help consumers understand how to compare products. And then there's the issue of flexibility because of a real lack of understanding of all these options. We've seen people take the lump sum and leave an annuity on the table with a cost of living adjustment, just so they don't lose control. I'm not going to go through all the things that are on the EBSA website. But I'd like to also say that the timing is also crucial. When you think of what it's like for people to retire, and they go in and they have a choice of getting the check or making 60 decisions over here, it's pretty obvious what they're going to do. And in fact, anecdotally, we know that it often takes people 3 to 4 years, 5 years to even begin to think about making those decisions. And so they're making critical decisions in a short time span, and these are uneducated and irreversible decisions. So we need to help employers with education And I'm again hopeful that the Treasury and the Department of Labor, as they synthesize the comments on education initiatives, will bring us all together to find a better way to help consumers. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa, for inviting me to participate. I'm pleased to do so, and thank you for Cindy for setting me up so well. My job is to talk about the sort of the employer calculation in all of this. First, I like to start with the good news. There actually are assets to manage. If you look at include IRAs as a DC plan, which it is, there was $2.5 trillion in 1994, and there's probably $9 trillion today, and I wouldn't be surprised to see that double in the next 10 years. There's a lot of money going into this system. So there is going to be actual assets to manage. So these decisions really are important. I would argue that if you don't have more than $50,000 in one of these plans, the conversation really doesn't mean much. It's very hard to usefully, effectively, annuitize smaller amounts. So the good news is we have real money, and so we're talking about something that's important. As background, I would like to share a view from the employer community, which is employers care a lot about their retirees. Now, they don't care about people who just quit their job and going to work for their competitor. And so keeping all those $5,000 balances in the plan, they would just as soon get rid of those. But they like their retirees. The retirees have worked for them for 15 or more years typically. They've been doing what they've been asked to do. They've been helping the company be successful. They care about their retirees. So that's kind of a background. But thinking with that as a background, what are the realities that employers are dealing with? Because they have to make a calculation here. The first is, and a lot of these things have been mentioned by previous speakers, the first is that there's no one-size-fits-all. It's a very complicated issue. So there isn't an easy solution here to adopt. So, employers are looking at this, they're very nervous about trying to do this. It's not like how do you manage money for a 25-year-old? I think there's a fairly standard agreement on how you do that. It's not so easy about somebody retiring. What's the state of their health? Are they married? Does their spouse have assets? Are they going to get an inheritance? I mean, these things all taken into calculation. It's a very complex issue. The second thing is that, it isn't as if there isn't a solution here if the employers don't do something. People clearly can annuitize in an IRA. And in fact, there's a lot of innovation going on in the IRA world. There's lots of new kinds of products and solutions coming out. Most of those are being tried out in the IRA world. So it isn't as if there's no solution here. And technology is clearly coming into play. We have purchasing platforms now where you can buy very low-priced, competitively priced annuity solutions. Both Vanguard and Fidelity and Jamie. There are these solutions. If you can go on their websites, Kelly Hewler has their income solutions. Fidelity has a Canix program. I mean, there are solutions to this. So there's a lot of things going on in that world. So it isn't as if the employers, by not doing something, have cut people off from a solution. Another thing that we all need to know about the employer community is the employer community is diverse, especially in this area by size. Very large companies are I think they're aggressive in wanting to provide solutions to their retirees. And part of that is because they're very smart about all this. They have a lot of internal expertise. They have enormous scale because they have so many assets. They hire professionals to help them. They are actually they're confident they're adding value when they're involved in this. Small and medium-sized employers, they don't have that confidence. They know what they don't know. This is a complicated area, and they're looking at this and saying, I don't want to make a mistake. I mean, some of this stuff, if you put a person on a path to a bad decision, you might hurt somebody for 30 years. So they're very uncertain about their role. And we've had many conversations about this at PSCA, and this has been an ongoing discussion actually at our board for years. And you see this incredible split where the large employers want to be active and come up with solutions and do things, and the small employers are really hoping that people will take a lump sum and roll it into an IRA. because they're just very nervous about this. They're very nervous. So you keep that in mind when you think about it. Another reality is that the liability issue was mentioned. Employers, I can tell you that at every American corporation, one of the top 5 goals is not to be sued for anything. And people don't want to take on increased liability unless there's a benefit. So they're very aware of that liability issue. And Cindy mentioned about the benefit statements that would project, outcomes. No employer wants to be associated with something that could be interpreted by an employee as a guarantee. They don't want to be, and there are assumptions in those presentations. Somebody somewhere is going to say what the interest assumption is in this projection. And we're talking about what interest assumption would you use today for somebody who is 25 and doing this projection. That's a very tough issue. No employer wants to be associated with that decision. The liability that they feel that would come to them if they were associated with those kinds of assumptions is enormous. They don't want that liability. But really what's most impactful in their decision making is that participants do not want plan delivered annuities. You heard that earlier. Clearly, where we have plans that have had annuities, they've had them for years. We have some major companies with thousands and thousands of employees, and it's not unusual for these companies to go for years without anybody taking an annuity out of the plan. The participants don't want this. And interestingly enough, defined benefit plans, the pension plans, have provided more and more opportunities to annuitize. Why is that? Companies design their plans to please their employees. Employees have made it clear they don't want a stream of income. And so even though the default in the defined benefit system is for an annuity, a lot of companies have permitted employees to opt out, and what you see is a massive percentage opt out, even people in defined benefit plans. So participants want lump sum distributions. They want control of these assets, and believe me, employers are listening to what their employees want. And when their employees say, I don't want this, and the employers look at this situation, and their calculation is a cost-benefit analysis. On the one hand, you have the cost, which is more liability, more opportunity to be in trouble legally somewhere, plus you've got, and it was mentioned briefly, there is an additional administrative regime that is imposed by the government. So you have compliance issues with the IRS, another reason to get audited by the IRS if you offer an annuity in one of these plans. That's the cost, okay? That's the cost. On the other side, what's the benefit? The benefit is people would be taking these annuities or want them in plans. Well, what do you see? The employers weigh this, and what they see is all cost, no benefit. Employees don't want this, and all I see is cost to me. And so at this moment, what you see is the employers are saying, we're not going to be involved in having plan delivered annuities. And I think that, and where the companies have had these in the past, you see them going away. So, we've been tracking this in our surveys, and, certainly we're down to like 20% from probably 50%, 10 years ago. So companies are actually doing away with the annuity option in the plans. Basically, if the employees don't want it, the employers are not going to put themselves in a position where they're in trouble if they offer it. So that's it. On the other hand, employers want to be part of the solution. I think the education part, the advice part, is where they are interested in being involved. Some of our members have tremendous programs to assist their retirees. They bring the retiree and their spouse into seminars. They provide planning support. They provide lots of education. Clearly, they want to do that. So I think what we see happening is that the employer is becoming more and more involved in helping the retiree through the decision-making process. In our survey data, about a third now have special education programs at retirement. That number is growing. More and more companies are being involved in delivering that kind of information. So we definitely want it clear that we want employers who want to provide the education. They're encouraged to do that. And as you may or may not know, the availability of advice to manage the money in plans has been growing substantially. We think that probably 60% or more of 401k plans now have some kind of advice available on managing the assets. I'm hopeful that we would see that companies would voluntarily start adding advice, as part of their solution, that they would provide, a employer-selected advisory service that the employees could trust to help them with this thing. So I think you're seeing the employer idea is we're not going to have a plan design solution here, but what we'd like to do is have an education advice solution, sort of like what we're doing, with the management of the assets. Anyway, I appreciate the opportunity to kind of share with you what I see as the reality that employers face and how they're making that decision. And again, thank you very much, Lisa, for having us here.
Hi, I'm Jamie Calabrese. Lisa, thanks again for having us. My whole topic is going to be summed up in 3 sentences. There are unmet needs around retirement income, and if we don't fulfill them, we've got a public policy issue, and that is poverty among the elderly, and especially elderly women, because they're going to live longer. The second sentence is that there has been innovation in the industry that has and can address these needs to overcome the barriers that Cindy and David have talked about. But my third point is innovation alone is not enough. Regulation needs to happen. And since Mark is listening, I've got a few suggestions. He's heard them before, so he's not going to be surprised. There is demand. Let me sum up what the demand is by participants. You've heard a lot of the facts. Very simply, they want lifetime income. They don't want to outlive their assets, and they don't want to give up control of their principal during retirement. Traditional fixed annuities means turning your principal over to the insurance company. Giving up of control is a huge emotional hurdle. And folks don't want to do it for very practical reasons. What happens if they're the 50% that passes away before the lifetime expectancy? Their estate doesn't get their money. What happens if they have a medical emergency? What happens if their car breaks and they need access to some of the principal? So they want lifetime income. They want control of their principal. And we're also finding, especially in the last 3 years, that participants want to protect their income base as they're approaching retirement. They don't want to be subject to the volatility of the markets as they get close to retirement, but they know they still need to invest for 35 more years. And that's a real challenge. So how do you do that? Make sure you get upside potential, but avoid the downside. And sponsors, for all the reasons that David listed the objections on, are terrified to do something because they're afraid of unwritten rules. And we heard that throughout the process. So product innovation has addressed some real and perceived barriers. There are 3 different types of solutions. I'm going to be product neutral. They all have merits. They all have some challenges as well. They will be appropriate for some and not appropriate for others. The traditional method of providing lifetime income is a deferred fixed annuity. It's your plain vanilla annuity. You learned about it in economics class. It's a simple formula. It is the most economically efficient way to get lifetime income. It is also the most emotionally charged way of doing this for all the barriers I talked about previously. People don't buy annuities for all the reasons we talked about. It's largely control. Fixed annuities, deferred fixed annuities, especially if you buy it right at the point of retirement, 100% all or nothing, makes you subject to the spot interest rate environment at that time. And as an economist, that's a bad thing to do because I can't predict what the spot interest rates are going to be at anyone's here's retirement unless you tell me you're retiring tomorrow. And then you might not want to be subject to that. There's another set of products called GMIBs, Guaranteed Minimum Income Benefits products. And essentially what this is a series of ladders of deferred fixed annuities. And they're often purchased in retirement plans. That gets rid of the spot interest rate environment. It allows you to dollar cost average. It has some other benefits, but you still give up control of your assets. And many people are finding that a challenge. There's a new set of products that have been emerging, Guaranteed Minimum Withdrawal Benefit products, GMWBs. They're also called Guaranteed Lifetime Income products as well. You'll hear different acronyms. Essentially what this product is It is an insurance product around a target date fund. That's the simplest way to describe it. Many of the products protect your income base for a certain amount of time leading up to retirement. And then at the point of retirement, they guarantee, in Prudential's case, and others have different percentages, 5% withdrawal for the rest of your life, but always having access to the market value. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot more detail about the product structure. We've got literature that illustrates that. But GMWBs have a lot of benefits. They provide very clear principal protection up to retirement. They do guaranteed lifetime income. They allow the individual to have access to their market value at all times. Their fee is transparent. It works like a fund in a plan, so people can move in and out and asset allocate appropriately. You can cover it within ERISA. It allows all the benefits that we've learned around the Pension Protection Act and putting it in place. Dollar cost averaging. It is designed to meet the needs of QDIAs and the principle putting fluoride in the water. How do you help participants do the right thing and set them on the right course? And it's becoming the default in-plan solution that providers like Prudential are offering. In fact, 4 new competitors started offering it this year. And what's interesting is in places where there is not the regulatory burdens for retirement plans, they're being adopted. I don't rarely mention a competitor's name, but I'm going to in this case. The governmental marketplace is not an ERISA marketplace. ICMA-RC is an institution that focuses entirely on the government marketplace. They have rolled this out as a default to all 6,000 plans this last fall. It's elective on whether or not the participants adopt it, but close to 1 million participants who are government employees of counties and municipalities now have access to GMWBs in their retirement plans because they're not worried about the same regulatory hurdles that the corporate and the private sector have. And that really, to me, is a great vision for what the public-private partnership can be. Continued innovation. There will be continued innovation in this marketplace. There's a number of exciting developments that continue to address unmet needs that David and Cindy have outlined. But essentially what we think needs to happen is through the process, the wonderful listening process that Mark and his colleagues at the Department of Labor have done through the RFI and then through the hearings, we think that a couple very simple regulations need to be modernized. The first one is they can modernize the Department of Labor's Advice Bulletin 96-1 that clarifies education versus advice, especially around these retirement income products. We are supportive and we believe that the Lifetime Income Disclosure Act, the principles behind that talk about how and enhance the conversation around lifetime income are critical, and as a provider are willing to provide that. We think that it is important that there is clarification that the risk fees associated with lifetime income products are deemed not inherently imprudent. I know I'm getting into very technical details, but sponsors really like the new QDIA regulations, and they want to make sure that this product can be considered a QDIA if they've just spent all this time and energy on target date funds. And we think it's important to extend safe harbor to cover a broad range of lifetime income solutions, not just the immediate fixed annuity, which it was written for at the time because that's the product that was out there. And we should allow innovation and regulations. I agree with my colleagues that you can't talk about retirement income with also talking about coverage. We've talked about that before, but coverage is critical to cover the rest of the 50% of American workers that don't have access to a retirement plan at the workplace. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Jeff.
Thank you, Jamie. I think you covered a whole list of pros remarks I was going to make, and I think when you hit the coverage one, all my peers have covered everything. So I think we'll go right to Q&A, if you don't mind. Excuse my cough, by the way. I had a cold about a month ago, and I still can't get rid of the cough. It only happens when I talk. My team seems to enjoy that because they tell me don't talk. but I'll try to get through this. A couple things. I'll just give you a quick background, so when we get to Q&A, I can give you a little bit, maybe different perspective. I'm not an expert. I'm not an expert on these issues. I'm not an expert on policy. I'm just somebody that actually spent 25 years kind of living through this. So I started in the late 80s, actually, as a portfolio manager in the stable value area, when that was 90% of defined contribution assets. I moved in for a 9-year career of advising Fidelity's largest pension clients on both defined contribution and DB on how to design their programs. So when we had an expansion of investment choices in the plan, the advent of advice and guidance, those types of things, I ran our consulting practice to do that. And for the last 6 years, the organization has asked me to kind of focus on what I call the back end of DC. And so I've been overseeing the insurance company for the last 6 years. So I've had a very different lens on some of these issues over the last 6 years as we try to figure out what do we do in the insurance area to help our customers do generate this lifetime income. A couple points I'll just make, and I think they're just reiterations of what my colleagues have said that's out there. First, Cindy, I may know a few folks over at Putnam. Pretty much all the people I used to work with at Fidelity, but that's a different story. I think Mark said it, and Mark said it well. The issues that we face, some of the things that we're looking for from a public policy or from a private sector development perspective, are not going to be any good if we don't solve the accumulation and continue to solve those issues in the accumulation. If you don't have enough money, it doesn't matter what we do in the insurance area. It doesn't matter whether you use annuity or a lifetime income, or we develop an innovative, whether you do it in a plan or out of a plan. So there's still some work, I think, to do there. 50% of the labor force still has no access to a 401k plan. So while we're talking about only 50% of the labor force and trying to figure out how to make that better, there's still 50% that don't have that access. The second thing is to read this. I thought this was a wonderful piece. I've spent really the last 6 years within Fidelity trying to advance a lot of these particular issues, studying the history of both DB and DC, understanding what are the crux of the issues that are out there. I wouldn't say it if I didn't feel it, but I thought this was a wonderful encapsulation of both the retirement system in the U.S., the migration from DB to DC, the challenges that brings. I do believe, as somebody that's done this for 25 years, the DC model is a really good model. We just got to figure out how to make it broader, more accessible, and more successful than it did before. A lot of the issues that we're talking about now, we're starting to talk about principally because of one thing. The first group of folks born in 1946 are hitting 65 this year. And that's a critical date. 2/3 from the research I've looked at, 2/3 of the U.S. labor force retires in the age of 62 because they can. 85% of the U.S. labor force is retired by 65. 4 million workers a year are hitting those milestones. The reason we're starting to think about income is because the front end of that baby boomer generation is just hitting there. When you look at the QDIA stuff that came out of PPA, you look at 404C, which was early 90s, you look at all the regs that came out of Treasury or DOL, they followed the interest levels of the baby boomers. So I wasn't surprised to hear David talk about plan sponsors and what they want to do and what participants are asking for, is because you're following that age band and that wealth to solve those issues. So anyways, the only other comments I just wanted to make is, in terms of our perspective, I think at Fidelity is, one, there's still some good work to be done on the accumulation stage. We still think it's best to confront income at the point either near or at retirement. We talked a lot about the competitive nature of the private market. In here, there's some great discussions about some of the limitations that actually annuities have in the pension marketplace, coming from the legal area about not being able to discriminate against male or female joint or survivor with the production or with the issuance of annuity quotes that are out there. In the private market, you don't have those hindrances. So there's a lot of things for us to do. I think accumulation is still important. I'm excited about the debate that's going on now because you have somewhere around 78 million baby boomers in the next 19 years are going to be facing these issues in a pretty rapid pace. So thank you for your comments, and I look forward to the Q&A session.
All right, so you've heard one of the best panels I've ever heard on retirement. These were an excellent way to frame. I'm going to push a few questions and then we'll open it up. Mark, Jeff left us with this interesting point that coverage and buildup are really still a part of making it last. Where is the administration on this now? What do you see as possible to achieve on yes, we're starting with the question of how to not get poor in retirement, but where do we start? What have you been doing?
Well, Lisa, as you know, the the fundamental need to cover the roughly half the workforce that don't have access to a 401k or a defined benefit plan or any other easy, effective way to save at work is still front and center and should be. Senator Bingaman, Representative Neal, various co-sponsors have introduced legislation to address that problem through IRA options that would involve automatic enrollment of employees whose employers do not sponsor a retirement plan, with a tax credit for the employer that does this, and an arrangement that would help provide standardized default investment options for people that would promote low cost and easy decision making. That's something that the administration has been very interested in, has been proposing, supporting, and we hope that can move forward while at the same time we pursue a diversified portfolio of retirement security strategies. More accumulation, more coverage, controlling leakage to the extent we can, discouraging leakage, promoting the options of income management for people so that they'll have a better understanding of how to cope with the spend down, and promoting the education and the advice that my colleagues were talking about, which is really fundamental, because we're dealing with options, we're dealing with individual choice ultimately, and so we're trying to enrich that choice and encourage people to have more to choose about.
Mark, we've typically come to you for insight on what the Treasury and the Labor Department are doing, but you heard a lot about education and advice, both from Cindy and David and our other speakers. What are there also ways? I know there is a Financial Literacy Education Commission that was established some years back. Are there ways that you're also exploring to work on that issue from Treasury, from the education side?
Yes, there are, and in fact, all the government agencies are banded together in this financial education and capability effort. Treasury, Labor, Social Security, SEC particularly involved, the Fed in that. And we are trying to do our part, but I think it's like so much of this, it's a private-public partnership, and I put the private first in that. The creativity, the innovation in the private sector, the sensitivity to what the employees are saying, as David was pointing out, and what people's needs appear to be. So, I think we're trying to do it together, and as part of that financial literacy, or really financial capability, we're trying to give much more attention to this management of income, management of assets in retirement issue.
Great. Jamie, you have also been an advocate for this Disclosure Act. Can you give us your sense of what the outlook is for hope on some kind of action on disclosure?
Sure. The Lifetime Income Disclosure Act, its guiding principle, and what we have found, because we have retirement gaps on statements already, is that we find it is a call to action for workers to think about how their savings and their actions are going to impact their retirement. We find that individuals that look at the retirement income calculator and the Lifetime Income Disclosure Act, like display, increase their savings rates by 4% of salary. And we have found no other method that gets as many people engaged and involved and taking positive action toward their retirement than the illustration and the calculation that's necessary to do the Lifetime Income Disclosure Act. I think that you will often hear the challenge that employers will say, I don't want the additional burden, I don't want the liability associated with it that David articulated. And I think a set of standards about how to illustrate it so that it's not a burden on it's not a choice of the employer, but it is a choice of either the provider or the industry as a whole, helps overcome that hurdle and can ease any employer concerns along the way while still getting the benefit to the participants.
Jeff, since we're on your end of the table, give us your view on this question of how illustrating savings, what kind of a tool that is, both for illustrating the stretch and the build-up, and if you've got any other efforts that you know about building savings.
No, I think it's a great question. It's as Jamie indicated, I think what we see is the same thing when you're translating certain behavior into lifetime income. You do see participants in these plans make dramatically different differences. I'd argue, though, that it's a two-pronged question. One is how do you calculate the number? And I do think there's a viewpoint that labor could help in some consistency areas here. I'll give you an example of where some of our debate has been. Do we do a standard asset allocation mix based upon somebody's age? Let's say 60-40, use historical numbers, accrue them, I think, as David mentioned, from 25 to 65. Do we do 65 or do we do the stated retirement age in the plan document? Do we do the current participant mix or a mix that's appropriate for that participant? Do we use Ibbotson data or other data? Once we accumulate it, if we're doing a 40-year accumulation, the disparity of results can be significantly wide. You double compound that by saying, okay, now how do I translate that into income? I've got assumptions I've made over a long period of time for the accumulation. Now what do? Do I use the annuity tables to determine what that would transpose into an annuity? Do I do the general mortality tables or do I do the annuitization tables? Or do I do a sustainable SWIP? And again, a sustainable SWIP could be 4%, and annuity tables could give you 8%. So you start compounding accumulation variables. You double compound it when you start saying annuity between this. So guidance as to how we provide some translation between behavior and income, I think, is necessary. Otherwise, we're all going to go off and do our own kind of independent thoughts that are there. So I think it's two things. One is what is that number that we're going to put on those statements to affect that behavior? And methodology would be helpful, and guidance from probably labor is the best place for that. The second thing I think is really what Jamie was talking about is how do we as vendors and plan sponsors in this industry then use that to be able to model behavior. A single number is great. How to change that number, improve that number is the biggest contribution that we can make. So we see it as either a tool or a paper-based program that says if you defer more, here's how that number changes. If you change your asset allocation, here's how that number changes. It's that interactive piece that is necessary to change behavior. A number in and of itself is going to be no other number that they look at a statement. Being able, though, to have consistent methodology, but also a tool that invokes a repetitive process is really the kind of key to changing behavior.
Cindy, when we talk about changing behaviors, you have done such a good job of both honoring those and recognizing folks who've made a difference in this world. You've walked the talk. You've also helped us see the gap that exists. You've talked about, the real gap in knowledge that exists. So I have two questions. One, I'd like to get you on record of saying, can we all come back to you when we get something developed to make sure it's really consumer friendly? And then, great, that was a yes. And then, do you have advice for the way we've heard here both industry perspectives but others on how to be thoughtfully communicating in our educational materials? What are you looking for that really speaks to what you've described as the millions of people who aren't in this discussion?
I think it's really an enormous problem. I mean, I think the bigger issue is what I mentioned, that people need all along, I think, to have some idea of what it's all leading up to. And I'm a little skeptical that just that little thing in the box, I think that's a start. But then people sort of have that number and they still don't know where to go next. And the problem is, as people are making all these decisions, there's no help. I mean, that's, the things that Jamie was saying, I think about the county workers or David, I guess, was saying where the employers bring in people. That's what used to happen. Pension clinics with the defined benefit plans, I think, for years. And then not that anybody ever understood. We used to call that the invisible benefit because people, they couldn't see it. They didn't know what it was. It was like, oh, yeah, they're putting away some money for me someday. Well, I'll never be here when I'm 65 anyway. So, but at least it gave you some sense. So I can't give you that little magic formula.
All right. Pamela, besides being the author of the now acclaimed publication, which I hope you all pick up, thank you, Jeff, you also helped us think of a more traditional approach to annuity in the IFS Security Plus. And could you heard Jamie and Jeff describe the evolution of lifetime income products, but could you explain how the Security Plus proposal fits within this real difference of choices on lifetime income?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. At Aspen IFS, we like to solve problems. We like public-private partnerships, and we try to look out for low and moderate income people. We recognize that it's probably going to take quite a while to fix this annuity or lifetime income problem in the private pension system, even for those it touches. But we also understood that even though people don't understand annuities, as they get closer to retirement, they start to understand Social Security, which is the primary annuity and a very good annuity that most people get in this country. So we thought, well, before we finish educating people, why don't we just try to sell them a little bit more of Social Security-like income? So we've come up with a plan to enable the Social Security Administration to sell to people voluntarily a product backed by the private industry, which is a small Social Security additional payment that would be delivered through their monthly checks.
And if you need a better description of Security Plus, we've got it for you. I want to come back to David Ray. David, you're always the most helpful in walking us through where the employers sit, and I think the description of small and large employers is so helpful. I want to ask you to zoom out a little for us. There are so many debates that affect the one we're talking about today on making it last. It's the Social Security debate, it's the tax reform, it's the whole questions about where we go with our plan industry. So could you zoom out a little bit of this focus on just the distribution moment and give us a little bit more of your broader sense of what employers would want and would expect in the next year or two as people in this room help move retirement policy forward?
Well, employers need certainty, that's for sure. I think the clarification of 96.1 would be very helpful. I mean, many employers are adverse to moving forward unless they feel the government has virtually blessed their action. And so, a clarification that certain kinds of education is not advice, so that employers can really be aggressive with their education will be very positive. But all of us recognize that advice is a good thing as well. So I think, clarifying that employers are invited to be more aggressive with the education and advice, I think, is probably what they're looking for. I don't know that they're looking for any regulatory solution at the moment. I think they want to let the innovation work its way out a little bit. You heard some descriptions of some really interesting things that are going on. Those, before employers are going to start adopting those things or acting, they'll want to see those proven out. So I think that employers would rather wait and see encouragement of this innovation, then see it proved out, maybe in through the IRA system or in the more private side of it, and then at that point they might be willing to say, okay, now let's incorporate that somewhere into safe harbor designs or things like that, which would encourage that. But they're going to be cautious about that. This is not the same thing as investing money, where I think there's a fairly general agreement on how money should be managed in the system. I mean, clearly people have different needs, and there's family situations and things, but how people are going to manage money in retirement is a very, very different issue, and people really haven't worked that through. Think about this. For as long as humans have been on the earth, until the last 50 years, people basically worked until they died. And we have transitioned that. This is a whole new human experience. This lengthening of the lifespan is so fundamentally changing everything about who we are and how we act and certainly how we manage our money. And we're still learning about that. All of this it's why it's so exciting to be part of this process, because, I mean, this is cutting-edge stuff. And I think that before employers are going to get mixed up in this in a big way, they're going to want to be confident that the solutions are proven out there. So I think we would probably say, let's let Jamie go at it, and let's find out what he says, and let's see some people use it, and let's see how it works for a while, and then maybe move forward with some kind of regulatory encouragement.
Very great. Well, now you know why I love my job. This is great information. It's your turn. So I understand we do not have a wireless mic, so I'm going to repeat your questions for the camera, and I welcome questions for the next 15 minutes. Yes, sir. And if you follow the convention of just saying where you're from, if you could.
Sure. Richard Shea from Covington and Burlington. I just wanted to ask a question. We've sort of talked quite a bit about the problem of coverage, and Mark has done a lot of, and others here as well, done a lot of groundbreaking work on, the idea of auto enrollment being moved not just from, retirement plans, but to people who work at a place where there is no retirement plan. And linking that idea with, if the money that from auto enrollment goes into something like an IRA or an account, you still have this problem of what you do with the money in the retirement phase, and you have the problems of leakage. I think it would be worthwhile to spend some time thinking about linking the auto enrollment idea with something like buying up the Social Security benefit or purchasing a product that has annuitization or lifetime income built into it. And I don't want to suggest what that is. I mean, the simplest one would be just, you get a bigger Social Security benefit, but there's lots of other intermediate solutions that might have some of these characteristics of the products you talked about. There might be access to a value, but still a promise of lifetime income. And I just think, in terms of coverage, this is probably what we've learned from behavioral economics could be carried over, and what we're learning about lifetime income could be carried over to some type of solution like that.
Richard, did you have anybody in particular that you wanted to say something in response? Richard's question is about we've moved on auto enrollment where there's built-ins, and so could we move in a more built-in fashion to the decumulation phase?
Yeah, maybe Mark. I'm sure everyone.
Great.
Yeah, lots of people have interesting thoughts on this, I think. But
David.
Richard, I think that's a very pertinent insight, and I happen to have written about that in a prior life. There's a paper I did with John Turner a few years ago under the Retirement Security Project at Brookings in Georgetown on possible ways to move in that direction. But that, I guess, I'm, on the one hand, very optimistic about the notion that potentially one could take the success of the target date fund, the QDIA movement that we've tried to encourage as part of the whole automation of the 401k plan, just putting people in default investments but letting them choose to opt for other things if they want to. The way that has worked the way it's been taken up by the market suggests, could you do what I think both Jamie and Jeff perhaps were alluding to, particularly Jamie, embed some lifetime income into the default, the most sort of widely accepted defaults. In a sense, we have target date funds now that have a fixed income component. Bonds. Well, annuities are, of course, invested in bonds by the insurance company backing up the lifetime income. So as a very broad concept, I think that there's promise. You could potentially provide some more investment stability and a potential lifetime income as part of such a vehicle. But I think it should be very much up to the employer. And Jamie talked about the guaranteed minimum withdrawal benefits as sort of taking a step in this direction toward the QDIA. The employer has to be comfortable in our current system in choosing default investments, and so it's a bit of a stretch, I think, to assume that the government should do too much there. It's one thing for the government to make it safe for the private sector to develop these options, and then for the plan sponsors to be willing to choose them if they feel comfortable. And again, because there's so much diversity, there is a fair amount of diversity in people's needs in retirement, as David was saying and others were saying, that you need to be careful about how much this is, how to build in lifetime income into the sort of DC part.
Right. Although, Mark, and I'm thinking here of Cindy's constituency, right, which is where we started talking about people who aren't in any retirement other than Social Security. The value of defaults, automatic enrollment, default investments has been demonstrated, and I think the idea is adding to this a default payment mechanism. You see what I mean?
Which we've got in our
unless you have
pension
something
plan.
that works on auto, you can have
Yep.
you opt out of it, but unless you have something that works on autopilot, so that people don't have to think about this if they're not going to.
I hear more people want to respond. I think we get your question, that it's the...
I definitely want to respond. I want to point out something about defaults. I'm back to realities and how employers think. First off, with the default, you better be right. Okay? You don't just... When we do automatic enrollment for a 25-year-old, we're pretty confident that we're doing the right thing. Okay, that's why I say I want proof. I want to know these things work before I start making decisions for other people. So I better be right. And the second thing is my participants better like the default. We have a default right now in the pension system. It's called a defined benefit plan, where the default is an annuity and the difficult solution is a lump sum. Plan participants go to great lengths to get around the default annuity position in the defined benefit system. They don't like it, and so they go around it. So we have to keep in mind, defaults are great, but there are two real important conditions. We better be right, and the participants better be going along with us, or we're not going to have a successful program. So we want to be cautious when we think about defaults.
Jamie or Jeff?
I couldn't agree more with David. I think I hear where you're going, and I think it's a great way to look at it. But I think we need to separate the participation in a plan, regardless of what the investment is. So how do we get those 50% of the labor force into some type of savings pattern that's out there? The second question I would argue, which I think David is somewhat highlighting here, is where do you start spending for lifetime income in terms of costs? Now, we would argue that spending upwards of RGMWB is 1.5 to 2 points of insurance cost for the guarantee we're providing. Do you start that cost at 25 and take that out of the capital market return of the default option when you don't know whether or not you're going to need an annuity at the end? David talks about the defined benefit plan and the people's aversion to getting out of the annuity. That's a decision made at retirement, not in the accumulation stage. And so I think the way that we're looking at things is maximize participation and the ability to accumulate assets in the accumulation stage, and then let the competitive product development, once you get near retirement, take hold to design an income program that's custom for you. So it's hard to know what you're going to have for a custom lifetime income needs until you get to retirement. You don't know what your health is. You don't know what your wealth is. You don't know what your other sources of income are. There's so many other perplexing things that you don't know. So to mandate or require buying or paying for income units for a 20 or 30 or 40-year period, all that does is drag away your return and ultimately the nest egg that you'll have, and it takes the competitive nature, I think, out of that decision at retirement.
I have lots of questions coming, and I think you picked a hot one. So, Steve Goss, Social Security.
Actuary from Baltimore.
Actuary from Baltimore.
What a question for Jamie, really picking up on Pamela's modest proposal about what sounds effectively like a way to try to encourage the purchase of CPI index-like annuities. And would you just address from a seller's point of view, from an insurance company's point of view, the challenges you see in a CPI indexed annuity, and that it entails not only the normal longevity risk of an annuity, but the extent to which that longevity risk is compounded by the fact that when you CPI index the payouts, it increases the amount of risk for extra longevity that might occur, and all of this, of course, on top of the anti-selection possibilities. So people have an option of buying the annuity versus not.
For those, did you hear most of that question? It's basically take Pamela's point and can you sell it? A CPI indexed annuity. Can you build it? Can you price it?
Yeah, the concept that Aspen outlined so nicely is a product to make sure that individuals get to retirement with a well-defined amount. Its goal was not about income in retirement. So the product that the Security Plus gets you to retirement with a dollar amount. I have that philosophy and the experience, and what we see in the marketplace is people want to get through retirement, not just to retirement. So it is an elegant solution that does what it set out to do very effectively, and probably the most efficiently that there is. It combines an S&P 500 with annuities to get to retirement very nicely.
And that's our retirement savings plus in the security.
In the security plus. In the other place.
Both have
Yes.
plus?
In the security. I'm sorry that I'm confused.
That's okay.
Thank you.
But plus is the one that
in the security
copies
plus piece.
Baltimore.
Yes. It gets back to the other issue, and I'm sorry that I confused the two. It's all about control. It's back to what I said before. Individuals don't want to give up control of the principal. That's what we found in the practical experience.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. Again, I'm an analyst at heart. $275 billion of annuity sales in 2010. About $8 billion in fixed immediate annuities. $3 billion of that was probably structured settlements. We talk all about the behavioral finance of reasons why they don't do it. Insurance companies can't hedge CPI, so they'll offer you a product that does it because they'll say, we'll start with your payment and we'll increase it 3% a year. And that's an approximation of it. So without a clear low-cost way to hedge inflation, you're not going to get a CPI-linked product that's out there. And you're designing a more complex product that people don't buy right now. Immediate variable annuities, you talk to my actuarial staff, will tell you the immediate variable annuities are the absolute best way to solve for lifetime income over your lifetime with an inflation hedge. Last year's sales was about $150 million. So you got to couple the two that's out there of what can we get consumers to look at. And I changed the question because I hate the word annuities. It's not about annuities. It's about lifetime income or longevity. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. Annuities are the only way you can introduce mortality credits. And mortality credits are really optimal for essential income. But you also have a level of discretionary income where I think capital market products, low-cost ones, are actually an optimal way to do that variable component of your spending patterns. But it's only an actuary could ask that question. It's a great question. It's just a tough one when you get to the real world to convince a consumer to use that in a portfolio. They just don't grasp it.
We've got time for a couple more questions. Deb. This is Deb Whitman of Senate Aging.
I wanted to follow up on David's comment that employers are reluctant to put lifetime income amounts because of liability and assumptions. But we know that TI Craft, through Putnam, Fidelity, are all creating this as part for their clients. Are you finding that employers are rejecting that information or are wary of including that information for those who go through those providers?
Some use it and some don't. And TI-CREF is mostly in 403B plans, and it's a real question about the liability. But no, some employers like this and some employers don't. I mean, that's, and we think that, we're big proponents of the voluntary system, and as these things become accepted and people are comfortable, you'll see more and more companies doing it. We don't have an objection to the concept and the implementation. Lots of people have gap calculators in their programs, and they're all over the place. They have they're constantly evolving and changing, and that's all a good thing. Our concern is that the government would start mandating this, and then pretty soon they would be designing them. We think that this is an area of enormous innovation and energy, and we'll let that happen for a while before we start talking about what are the best right practices. And once the government starts mandating things, it tends to calcify things.
But with a safe harbor provision, if the government gave a stream of assumptions that they found acceptable, will eliminate that liability?
Well, it might eliminate the liability, but it wouldn't eliminate the question about whether it's right for that group, and that's the issue. I mean, we're back to when you start talking about, and if the government says we're going to provide a safe harbor for something, then the government better be right, because they're directing people downstream. Are we ready? Is the government that confident right now that they know what that safe harbor should be? I'm saying we need to let things work for a while. I mean, this is an area where a lot of things are changing, and we're learning things every day.
David, I'll just add, because I want to make sure I heard the question right. You were commenting more about on the statement of projected income, not on a product answer, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And there's lots of stuff going on. A lot of employers like those, and some don't. Let it happen naturally. That'd be our view.
Last question? Anybody brave? Yes.
Tom, your Finance Committee. There's been a dearth of discussion today of Social Security. Pam alluded to it, and it seems like, and I'm just asking for reactions from anybody, but it seems like there is a way to purchase annuities very much like Aspen proposal by delaying your annuity starting date. Every month you delay it, you're buying more annuity. And if everybody delayed to age 70, presumably they could live the rest of their lives fairly well. And but the trend seems to be, and it seems to be like a corollary to everybody going in lump sum. The trend seems to be to take your annuity early rather than later. Shouldn't there be some emphasis to get people to take their Social Security benefit at a later age so that they only have to provide for themselves until they're age 70? And then when I get my Social Security statements, I'm amazed at how much I get at 70. But I don't want to wait for that.
You shouldn't answer your own question. Tom's question is a powerful one, and you all heard it, I think. It's about being able to delay voluntarily taking your Social Security payment increases the amount of Social Security income you'll have in retirement. Panelists?
I would add that there's a tremendous tax planning opportunities as well. That's why this is complicated. For some people, if for example, if you are married, basically using your deferred income up early so you can delay your Social Security is a great way to pass a wonderful benefit onto your spouse in the case of your death. So this is complicated. So we didn't even get into the tax planning issue. because Social Security benefits are taxable if you have income, and so maybe you should use up all your income early and take the Social Security late so that you don't pay taxes on your Social Security after age 70. I mean, this is a very complicated area, and it really is depending on individuals very much. And you can't discount the fact that people really are worried they're going to die too soon and not get their full benefits. And you know that's out there in the world, that we should take our Social Security benefits as soon as we can, because A, we don't know how long we're going to live, and B, maybe the government's going to take them away from us. And by the way, that is a real problem. I mean, we need to make sure that people have confidence in Social Security, that they're going to get it until the end, because there are people who are deciding to take their Social Security at 62 because they're afraid the government's going to terminate the program at some point down the road, and they want to make sure they get theirs back. So, I mean, as a big supporter of Social Security, I think one of the things we've got to do is make sure that system delivers its promised benefits.
I think there's some more amens here. Mark and Cindy.
Yeah, amen to that. And the point, Tom, that you're making, I think, is really very important, that apart from the fact that there are tax planning issues, as David points out, and that people's circumstances differ, it depends on whether you're single, you're married, the relative ages of the spouses. I think your point is very important, that many people appear to be reflexively taking Social Security at 62 or as early as they can take it without considering the option carefully and in an informed way of deferring and thereby, in effect, buying more annuity. And some people can't defer. They don't have any other sorts of income, perhaps, but a lot of people do have the choices. I have talked to the Social Security Administration about this, and Steve, no one's going to put you on the spot to ask you to comment on it here, and obviously I can't speak for that different agency, SSA, but I do know from conversations I've had with them about whether the way that people get advice from Social Security about the relative timing, the timing options, is the way Social Security thinks it ought to be. Is the script optimal? Is the way the timing question framed the best way according to Social Security's sort of policy sense and senior management? And I know that they're well aware of this issue and that they have been focusing on it and and giving attention to it. So I agree very much. I think that's something that is an important piece of all this. And it also, as David says, it interacts with the private pension decision, but it can also help drive the private pension decision. Just as with Social Security, you can have people who start their private retirement drawdown, if they're fortunate enough to have one, as early as they can, just because it's there. And so, I think the ability to give advice and to give people a sense of what the options are and what the pros and cons are is really important, and the way that decision is framed for people, the choice is framed, the choice architecture, if you will, is key.
We are out of time. Cindy, do you want the last word?
I just want to say one quick thing, and that is that the economic crisis, I think, has really led to a lot of the financial planners saying exactly what you're saying. And that's sort of a step forward, I see, because it used to be that a lot of times the financial industry wouldn't even include Social Security as part of the foundation of, your retirement. So I think it's a good thing, and a lot of people are saying that.
So we've had crisis, we've had hope, we're living longer, we've got innovation, we've got administration interested in this, and we've got ideas. Thank you all for being a part of this. Help me in thanking our panel.
Thank you very much.